The ink is already dry before the realization hits, and by then, the architecture of their reality has been dismantled, brick by invisible brick. We like to imagine that catastrophe arrives with a bang, with the shattering of glass or the wailing of sirens, but in the quiet, dusty living rooms of the elderly, devastation arrives on a whisper carried by the rustle of paper and the click of a ballpoint pen. You are picturing a scammer, perhaps a faceless voice on the telephone, or a stranger knocking on the door with a too wide smile. But that is the comfortable lie we tell ourselves to sleep at night. The true predator is rarely a stranger. The most profound psychological manipulation does not happen in a dark alley, but at the kitchen table, over tea, orchestrated by the people they trust the most, fueled by a terrifying biological imperative that overrides logic, reason, and self-preservation. We are going to descend into the terrifying machinery of the aging mind, not to judge it, but to understand how 3 specific documents become the weapons of choice in a psychological siege that most victims do not even know is happening until they are standing in the wreckage of their own lives. This is not a legal lecture, this is an autopsy of the moment where autonomy is surrendered, where the fear of irrelevance meets the cold calculation of opportunism, and where the people you love sign their names on the dotted line, driven by forces buried so deep in their subconscious that they mistake the cage for a sanctuary. To understand why this happens, you must first strip away the assumption that your parents are simply losing it, because attributing these decisions to senility is a lazy, dangerous oversimplification that misses the darker truth. The brain of the aging adult is a battlefield where a desperate war is being waged between the prefrontal cortex, the seat of logic, planning, and skepticism, and the amygdala, the ancient reptilian alarm system that screams at the prospect of isolation. When a predator, often a family member or a helpful neighbor, places the first document in front of them, they are not hacking the logic center, they are hacking the loneliness. The first document is the most insidious because it masquerades as relief. A piece of paper known as the general durable power of attorney, but in the theater of the mind, it plays the role of the Trojan horse. The psychology here is rooted in the burden of autonomy, a phenomenon where the sheer weight of managing a life, the bills, the maintenance, the complex bureaucracy of modern existence becomes a source of chronic low-grade cortisol spikes that exhaust the aging brain. The manipulator enters this high-stress environment not as a usurper but as a savior, triggering a cognitive bias known as the halo effect, where the offer to help with a few small tasks creates a blinding aura of benevolence that obscures the reality of the transaction. They don't ask for control, they ask to take the load off. And the parent, drowning in the cognitive load of executive function, feels a rush of endorphins at the prospect of relief. They sign the power of attorney not because they want to give up their freedom, but because they are addicted to the sudden cessation of anxiety, unaware that they have just handed over the legal keys to their existence to someone whose shadow self is already calculating the liquidation value of their legacy. The silence in the room after that first signature is heavy, but it is not empty. It is filled with the invisible shift of power, a dynamic that the aging parent senses but suppresses through a defense mechanism called rationalization. They tell themselves, it's just for emergencies. He's a good son, or she's always been the responsible one, creating a narrative shield to protect their ego from the terrifying admission that they have just made themselves vulnerable. But the manipulator is operating on a different frequency, utilizing a psychological conditioning technique known as intermittent reinforcement. They reward the parent with attention, affection, and presence, the currency the elderly crave most only when compliance is demonstrated, subtly training the parent to associate saying yes with being loved and saying no with the cold vacuum of abandonment. This sets the stage for the second document, a piece of paper that strikes at the very core of identity and territorial instinct, the deed, transfer, or the predatory home equity line, often framed as a reverse mortgage or a life estate. The home is not just wood and drywall. For the aging mind, it is the externalized hard drive of their memories, the physical manifestation of their independence, and the fortress that separates them from the terrifying unknown of institutional care. The manipulator knows that attacking the house directly triggers the endowment effect, where we value what we own disproportionately, so they don't attack the house, they attack the fear of losing it. Watch closely how the conversation shifts, how the predator weaponizes loss aversion, a cognitive bias where the pain of losing is psychologically twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining. They whisper about the rising costs of taxes, the leaking roof, the threat of the government taking the home for nursing care, painting a vivid, terrifying picture of a future where the parent is destitute and homeless. Then, they present the document not as a sale, but as a protection strategy, a complex financial instrument that the aging brain already struggling with fluid intelligence and processing speed, cannot fully deconstruct. The density of the legal language acts as a cognitive fog, inducing a state of mental paralysis where the parent looks to the manipulator for translation. This is the critical moment of betrayal, the authority bias kicking in, where the parent defers to the younger, sharper mind, believing that the complexity of the text is proof of its necessity. They sign the deed or the equity release thinking they are securing their fortress, when in reality, they are liquidating the foundation, converting their generational wealth into a stream of cash that the manipulator can siphon off, leaving the parent as a guest in their own history, a tenant in the museum of their life. The horror of this transaction is that it is often accompanied by a feeling of gratitude from the victim, a paradox that is painful to witness. The parent thanks the child for handling the paperwork for saving the house, unknowingly engaging in a sunk cost fallacy, where they double down on their trust in the manipulator because admitting they made a mistake would mean facing the catastrophic reality that their judgment is flawed and their protector is a parasite. This psychological entrapment creates a closed loop, a sealed ecosystem of to where reality is defined by the manipulator, isolating the parent from other siblings, friends, or professionals who might spot the inconsistencies. This isolation is not accidental. It is a necessary condition for the third and final document, the one that rewrites the future and erases the past, the revised will or trust amendment. This is the coup de grace, the document that requires the total emotional subjugation of the victim. Because to change a will is to rewrite the narrative of one's life and the distribution of one's love. By the time this third document is introduced, the parent is often in a state of learned helplessness, a psychological condition where a subject, after being repeatedly exposed to uncontrollable stressors, stops trying to change their circumstances. The manipulator has established total dominance over the environment, controlling the mail, the phone calls, and the grocery runs, becoming the sole filter through which the parent perceives the world. Now, they weaponize reciprocity and guilt. They begin to subtly demonize the other siblings or potential heirs, planting false memories or distorting facts. Your daughter never calls. I'm the only one who takes you to the doctor. They are just waiting for you to die. This is gaslighting in its purest, most destructive form, rewriting the parent's autobiographical memory until the parent feels a profound, crushing guilt for being a burden on the one person who stuck around. The revised will is presented not as a legal change, but as a moral corrective, a way to make things right for the sacrifices the manipulator has made. The parent signs, not out of malice toward the disinherited, but out of a desperate need to pay a debt that was manufactured by the creditor. The signature on the revised will is the physical manifestation of the Stockholm Syndrome, where the captive identifies with the captor to survive the emotional stress of captivity. Deep in the subconscious, there is a terrified voice that knows something is wrong, a gut instinct screaming that this is a betrayal of their other children, of their values, of their former self. But the fear of the immediate reaction, the anger, the withdrawal of affection, the slammed door is more visceral than the abstract concept of a future inheritance. They sign to keep the peace in the room, trading the entirety of their legacy for a few more moments of perceived safety. It is a transaction driven by the hyperbolic discounting mechanism, where the brain values an immediate, small reward, avoiding a fight today over a massive future value, the integrity of their estate and family relationships. When the pen lifts from the paper, the manipulator often smiles, a release of tension that the parent mistakes for love, sealing the bond of their mutual destruction. What makes this psychological thriller so difficult to watch, and so impossible to look away from, is the realization that the parent is often not tricked in the way we think of a magic trick. On some deep, suppressed level, they often know, they perceive the greed in the eyes of the caregiver. They sense the hollowness of the promises, but they are trapped in a double bind, a situation where every option leads to loss. If they refuse to sign, they lose the relationship and face the terror of solitude and the complex world alone. If they sign, they lose their assets and their autonomy. Faced with this impossible choice, the human mind fractures, creating a state of cognitive dissonance where they align their beliefs with their actions to reduce the mental pain. They convince themselves they wanted to sign, that it was their idea, that this is what they chose. They rewrite their own internal reality to match the external constraints, becoming an accomplice in their own exploitation because the alternative, admitting that their child is a predator, is a psychological wound too deep to survive. This is the true nature of the manipulation. It is not a theft of money, it is a theft of the self. The documents are merely the artifacts of a psychological colonization, And as we pull back from this claustrophobic scene, leaving the pen on the table and the ink drying on the page, we are left with the chilling understanding that this is not a rare anomaly. It is happening right now, in millions of homes, behind drawn curtains. The silence you hear is not peace. It is the sound of a legacy being erased one signature at a time, in a tragedy written by biology, directed by fear, and acted out by the people we are supposed to trust the most. Would you like me to break down the specific red flag phrases manipulators use during these signing moments to help identify this behavior in real